Welcome back to Watch the Booker Man and to a video which is not within the usual series on the channel, because today I'm going to be looking at a mod which is one of the mods that I've most been looking forward to, and it's finally released in a beta version. It's by Mr. Canada, so people who've played TEW for a long time I'm sure are aware of the mods that Mr. Canada's made. For many months and years I used to play the Mr. Canada Data real world mods, which were the monthly updates, and they were always really enjoyable mods. So I'm looking forward to playing this because of who's made it, but also because it is a very interesting scenario, possibly the most played time frame of any era in professional wrestling, but for good reason. Early 2001, when WCW and ECW went out of business. This mod specifically sets up the scenario where Shane McMahon, as was the case in storyline, does buy WCW, but the company is kept open as a separate entity. This means that essentially you've got the roster that was the WCW Invasion roster. I'll go through it in a moment and I'll explain why I'm particularly interested in the challenge of this save. It's going to be quite difficult, I think, to rebuild WCW in this mod, and we can see there's only one major star, and that's the owner Shane McMahon. We then have a couple of stars, Booker T and Diamond Dallas Page, but you can see two big baby faces, so you're probably going to have to either turn one of them heel or look to push somebody from the well-known or below. Buff Bagwell, the top heel in the company, which I think at this time it was kind of considered that his gimmick was fairly stale, so whether you try and revamp him and give him a renewed push, or you look to the guys in the recognisable, but it's still pretty slim pickings. You're looking at the likes of Canyon, Lance Storm, Mike Awesome as your most over heels. Even the likes of Sean O'Hare and Chuck Palumbo, who they were trying to push, they're now baby faces, so you're looking at Stasiak and people like that. You'd have to say a relatively weak roster, with a large proportion of it in the unimportant section as well. You see the Cruiserweight champion, I think Shane Helms is even here, so your Cruiserweight division again is something that there's a lot of potential there, because there's, I mean, you look at Chavo Guerrero's profile, he's got a lot of talent. Shane Helms, Shannon Moore, all really good wrestlers, but if you wanted to rebuild and put some spotlight on the Cruiserweight division, there's still work to do there. The other side of it is in terms of signing people. Usually, of course, you'd think of the rebuild of WCW. You're starting the save and you're looking at the likes of Flair, Sting, Nash, Scott Steiner, all these big names who were already stars in WCW who you'd hopefully be able to bring back. But of course, as was the case for the WWF in real life, those guys were on Time Warner contracts, so they were getting guaranteed payments for just sitting on the sidelines, and it didn't really make much financial sense for them to continue. Of course, a few guys, I think Booker T and Diamond Dallas Page, the most notable examples of guys who forgoed that money so that they could join the WWF, and that is reflected in the mod. You're looking at the likes of Goldberg, who you'd probably want to build your company around. He's not available for a year and 2 months, which is, I think, when he turned up in WWE, or I think he turned up in 2003, but it's a long time. Even Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, some people you might only bring in on a short-term deal. You know, you're probably not looking at these guys as the future of the company. Randy Savage, Ric Flair, people like that. But they're good names to have in there while you try and get the rest of your roster over. Scott Hall, somebody who's available, but it again presents you that balance of, is Scott Hall, who we know in the game, or I assume in the mod, will have personal issues? Is it worth bringing him in, doing what you can with somebody who's that over, and hoping that you get maybe 3 to 6 months out of them before it goes sour, and in that time you've built somebody else up? Or do you just bypass them and accept that there's going to be that period of transition and it's going to be difficult to build up your roster? I assume Shawn Michaels was still under a WWF contract at that time, and even when you're looking to people who aren't that over, it's either non-wrestlers or people who are unavailable to sign. Maybe Jerry Lawler's somebody you could bring in as an occasional worker. Ken Shamrock, only 4 months out. Could he be somebody who you look to bring in as a guy who is well recognised, but it's difficult and it's going to be a real challenge? Now, that might put some people off entirely, the idea that you're trying to rebuild WCW and you're not being given the chance to sign these big names like Sting. But for me, that makes it a really interesting save, and I have set up a separate save, and I've not really booked any shows because I'm more formulating the ideas at the minute, because like I said, it's going to be very difficult, but in that sense very interesting for me. Kurt Hennig, again, somebody who's good in the ring. He's got a little bit of overness that you could hopefully use, but he's 43, and of course I'm sure there'll be them issues in there with his attributes. Yeah, so we can see he's a drinker, soft and hard drug use, so a real long list of things there that it's going to make it a little bit more difficult, but he's professional, he's easy to do business with. So do you take that side of it? You've got guys like Dustin Rhodes, who in a few months will be available, but again, a lot of people do have those issues. Jesse James we know about, and I suppose it'll be interesting to make those mistakes. I'd consider bringing Jesse James in. The Road Dogg, as he was known, recently left the WWF. Are those issues that he has or had at the time going to backfire and maybe ruin some of your early shows? It will be interesting to see, and I'd argue that the top name who you'd say is pretty much a banker, like anybody who starts playing this mod is probably going to bring this person into WCW, is somebody who I think has about 45 over us, if I remember correctly. Oh, so it's only 40, but 55 in the tri-state. But it's Rob Van Dam, who was a huge star in ECW, went on to a lot of success in the WWF, but I think if you're Shane McMahon, you're looking at this guy as one of the people who you can build as the next generation. Maybe with ECW closed, you do look to some of those other ex-ECW guys and try and build a little bit around them. So many interesting possibilities, and this is probably the biggest what-if time period in professional wrestling. If WCW had stayed open, even if you want to bring ECW back and see how they would have fared in a landscape where WCW and WWF are still existing and hopefully thriving, you get $10 million to start, so it's not going to be something where you're worried in 6 months you're going to be out of business. It's more about trying to build those new stars. Financially, you are secure. Your champions, you've got Booker T as the US champion. I'd probably be looking to vacate that title and try and build a work rate division around your United States Championship, the likes of Finlay, Lance Storm, Rob Van Dam, and building a really interesting mid-card. You've got the Cruiserweights, which was one of WCW's unique selling points, I suppose. The world champion Booker T, hence why I'd be looking at vacating the US title, and Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire. There is not much in terms of the tag team division either. There's a few Cruiserweight tag teams, and then you've got Team Canada, Palumbo and O'Haire. So really a full all-round rebuild job. That's what's going to be the big challenge, and that's why to me it's one of the most interesting mods that I've seen. Again, it is in beta, so there's probably going to be issues in it, and that's why I think a lot of people playing it is going to be better for the mod going forward, because I really do love the concept behind this, and I'll link to the thread on the Grey Dog Software forums so you can look into the thought process of Mr. Canada, because they've explained why those people are out on contracts and why certain people maybe aren't as talented as you might expect them to be. I think it was mentioned that maybe AJ Styles, Bryan Danielson, those types of people, they're not ready to be stars in WCW, as they weren't, of course, in 2001, but sometimes you find in mods you can hire people and quite quickly they can rise to the top of the card. I know I've done that in 2006 saves, where you bring people who've maybe only had a couple of years in the business, but because you know what they became, you sort of tend to push them a bit more. Whereas in this, from what I read anyway, I've not looked too much into it, but there's an effort made to ensure that the guys who became future stars at this time do have development to work on, and it will be a few years before you can get too much out of them. But in conclusion, I recommend anybody to play this. I am looking forward to doing a long-term save myself, and I'd be interested if anybody does play this mod, they let me know what they get up to, and maybe I can put an update in the comments of this video maybe in a year in game time and let you know what's happened. A mod that a lot of thought has gone into and that I'd been eagerly anticipating for quite a while, so great to see it finally out there. Thank you for watching, and I'm going to get on with playing WCW 2001. Cheers.